Hi, everybody. We're just waiting for people to join as they gradually come into the room. But perhaps while we're waiting for people to join, maybe I can just ask you to open the chat function, and in the chat function, just give us a message there as to where you are in the world or in the country. And perhaps tell us what the weather looks like there as well today, so we can have a little bit of a... Kim is from Cape Town. Hello, Kim.
Cape Town,
Hello, Eric.
miserable.
Miserable.
Cold Pretoria.
Cold Pretoria. Kevin
It's
in
a typical Joburg day. It's if you're in the direct sunlight, you'll probably get sunburnt.
Yes.
But it's cold and dry, or coolish. The English would say it's midsummer.
Yes. It's looking good. We still have people joining slowly but surely. Hello, Gordon from Nairobi. Really cold today. Yeah, but in Nairobi, when it's cold, it's 25 degrees and you put your t-shirts on. So I guess cold is relative. Lenasia, hello, Vinod. Good to have you here. Hello, Corsi from Johannesburg. All right, well, while we wait for a few more people, hello, Ali from Accra. Lovely there, 28 degrees in Accra. So looks like a lovely day there, or sounds like a lovely day there. All righty, we will start in about a minute or two. I see there are still a few more people joining us. So as you well know, within Zoom, you have the chat function and you also have the Q&A function. So what I'm going to ask is that if you do have any questions or any comments that you want to make as Mark and I are talking this morning, then can I ask you to please use the Q&A function as opposed to the chat function? It just makes it a little bit easier from a moderation point of view to focus in one place rather than having to toggle between the chat function and the Q&A function. So if you do have any questions, any comments that you'd like to make, or anything that you'd like us to answer, then please, as I say, use the Q&A function and type them in there. So I'm going to kick off and officially welcome everybody to our webinar this afternoon. We have chosen the topic of directors in the fourth industrial revolution. And that's going to be what we're largely going to be dealing with and talking through this afternoon. I'd like to welcome Mark Hiller, joining me in Johannesburg as well. Mark, hi. By way of introduction, Mark is the former CEO of Time and Tide. Mark, I'll ask you to tell us a little bit about that, perhaps in a few words shortly. Prior to that, has also worked in the security industry and in the, I guess you'd call it the printing industry and technology areas. He's an accountant. I'm not sure if he's a practicing accountant or not. We won't hold that against him. But Mark, welcome, and thank you very much for making some time this afternoon.
Yeah. How's it, Kieran? Thanks very much. And good afternoon to everyone, or anyone who's west of us, maybe good morning.
Thank you. So Mark, Time and Tide, not specifically a tech business, and I know a lot of the time when we talk 4IR or the fourth industrial revolution, often people associate that quite heavily with tech. But maybe just give us a bit of a perspective in terms of your background, and how that ties in with the whole idea and your thinking around the fourth industrial revolution, and specifically directors within operating in the boardrooms in the fourth industrial revolution.
Yeah, thanks, Kieran. Perhaps just to elaborate on my background and where I'm coming from. So Time and Tide is a hospitality, a tourism business. So we are suffering quite heavily during this COVID time. But there was a time before that, and there will be a time in the future. We operate very high-end luxury boutique destinations. We have 8 destinations in Zambia, so safari experiences for the well-traveled. And we also have an island in Madagascar, again, kind of adventure experience, exclusivity and privacy. So that's probably as far away as from tech as you can get. So I can talk about the context of what 4IR means in that sort of business, and perhaps also just to clarify and elaborate what Kieran mentioned. I'd spent probably over 20 years in the IT industry with different players in South Africa. Yes, I was involved with Lexmark and ran Lexmark in South Africa and Africa, but also spent some time with IBM, Data, some of the usual names, and involved in call centers, outsourcing, and I did spend some time consulting with some Chinese companies and in security, and also some tech companies in Singapore. But where I come to you from today is, and as Kieran said, you probably saw me aghast. It says I'm an accountant, so I guess at a DNA level, I am an accountant. But I'd like to think I come as similar to who you are in the audience, and I'm a commercial executive. I wouldn't consider myself to be a tech specialist, but in this day and age, you can't pretend that you can't ignore it. You can't treat it as a black box. So it's a tool, and how do you use it? How do you leverage it to further your business strategy and your business goals? So, we will talk about tech and we'll talk about elements of 4IR. But and if there is anyone, by the way, who is a tech specialist, well, then I hope I don't disappoint you. In advance, I probably will. But that's where I come from, and we'll talk about some of the changes that are happening and what they mean, and how I think in the write-up or the intro, we wanted to focus on 2 or 3 specific areas, and we'll try and touch on them. But I'm quite happy to, as best as I can, as a generalist, as someone experiencing it similar to yourselves, happy to take any kind of questions.
Fantastic. So perhaps, let's start off with maybe giving 4IR a little bit of a definition in terms of, so what exactly is it? Is it just a buzzword? Is it a phase or a trend? How do you see it? I mean, are we or aren't we in the fourth industrial revolution?
Yeah, and we should confess to our audience that we put a bit of a presentation together in the background. Yes. So I may jump to that. I definitely don't want to do death by PowerPoint. And if you're yawning, please send the feedback and we'll get out of it. But just to perhaps highlight some of these themes and topics and demystify it. So if it's okay, I'll just jump to that, and we'll flick through. Let me see if that's sharing. Looks like it should be sharing. Tell me if you can see it.
Yes, I can.
Thank you. Alrighty. So there are just a couple of opening slides here, and now it's not wanting to work. Beautiful. A tech fail. Play. Okay, here we go. Right. So these are a couple of intro slides. So 4IR, just the world of connectivity, and how do we make this journey and get from 3IR to 4IR? And in talking beforehand, some of the questions, and I've also seen some of the other blog posts and write-ups, is, are we in a 4IR? What is an IR? What were the first 3 beforehand? Is it an evolution or a revolution, etc.? So these are just a few kind of iconic pictures that are available that I think kind of help demystify it. So going back to kind of steam, railways, and the first kind of mechanization. And then if you think of Henry Ford and automation, being the second industrial revolution, and also quite importantly at that time, the telegraph and the telephone and discovery of oil in the late 19th century. And then everyone kind of says 1969 was the year of the third industrial revolution, which was when computers became pervasive. And you see the icon of the computer chip there and driving into tech as we know it. And there's that icon there of robotics. So robots coming into automation. And automation also features in what we're talking about 4IR now, as digital and internet and kind of all things being pervasive in the environment. Just to talk about that contrast of automation. Automation in the third IR was one machine doing repetitive tasks, very specific, and picking one thing up and putting it in another place, or soldering it and putting it together. Whereas what we're seeing in automation, both now, but we will continue to see, is very sophisticated machinery with sensors and taking in feedback from its surroundings and adapting what its process would be to complete a task or an objective, or to do some form of analysis. I like this particular slide, and Kieran, because I think I would imagine the question a lot of people have got is well, what does it mean? How should I think about it? And this one is a little bit deeper in thought, and down at the bottom there, first and second talked about scaling efficiency. Forgive me for looking to the left or the right, whichever way of your screen I'm facing, because I've got the presentation on a different monitor. So the first and second were scaling efficiency, doing things right, and then we got into computers and the internet a little bit later, it now becomes scalable adaptability. And you've got the empowering corporations. They were the biggest beneficiaries and the biggest change that we saw in the first, second, and third industrial revolution, talking about industry. But a lot of the thought now is definitely leading towards it's empowering people. Clearly, it's going to have an impact on business, but as it also says there, on society, on the environment, on also government. And this is it's quite a change. So are we in it? Are we in it? Are we not in it? Everyone's going to have their opinion. I don't think you need to get hung up on semantics. I'm certainly not trying to wave a flag and say we are or we aren't, and I'm right and someone else is wrong. I think it's a context. I think it's a movement, and you have to be aware about it. And what's happening out there, and how is that going to impact your business? It's a little bit of an amorphous term. I mean, so it's perhaps to put a little bit more, and I mean, these terms are probably also amorphous to a lot of non-technical people, but to perhaps put some of what are the features that we're seeing that are going to become pervasive, and that are the themes that prevail in this discussion of 4IR are a lot of these tech. So if you look around that circle there, obviously mobile, but IoT, Internet of Things, cloud-based computing, big data, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality, sensors, 3D printing. But there are also some other things, and the next slide kind of also goes into it. I really don't want to do death by PowerPoint, but I do think some of these things, and by the way, this presentation is available, and Sadar are free to share it with you afterwards. So you don't need to take notes or screenshots if you're doing that. But some of the things that aren't here. So climate change, I mentioned climate change, but space travel has become a thing, and that's going to have some kind of impact. You might think it's not going to have an impact for many of us, but it will have some impact. Satellite communication. So Elon Musk and his satellite link communication is also happening. So these are big factors that we need to take into account. I think this is a movement. It's an era that we're going through. Not sure if I've answered your question.
I think I think that kind of outlines what the elements are, and I think one of the things that's interesting for me is that sometimes you look at some of these things and you go, well, they're a little bit far away from me. I'm not directly linked to them. But then when you start thinking about AI, for example, AI is in a whole bunch of places that you don't necessarily think of or come to mind sort of straight off the top of your head, or Internet of Things, So I think the point is that if you kind of sit down for long enough and think about it, a lot of these things or these elements of what the fourth industrial revolution are about are closer than you think.
And they will become pervasive. So, even blockchain's confused with Bitcoin, but blockchain, as opposed to being this wave of cryptocurrency, it's actually meant to be a secure ledger, and they're forecasting about changes to many industries, travel being one. And yes, I mean, and these are tools, and we'll talk in a few of the other points about how they can be deployed and give you a richer understanding of not just, when I say your organization, I also mean, the inputs to your organization, the outputs, the interactions you have with not only your key stakeholders of employers, suppliers, and customers, but also your other stakeholders. It's going to be a bigger and larger experience. And there's, of course, an opportunity to leverage that in your journey as to how you differentiate.
Okay, so we've kind of spoken about three themes that we're going to touch on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think your next slide is there's that wonderful saying that says there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing choices. So if we were going to pick three things to protect us or help us weather or navigate the storm, if you like, or the journey that we're going to go on, then perhaps let's start with people. And I saw a lovely little quote. I think it was one of your slides when we were chatting earlier about, I don't do. It's not rocket science. I work with people, or something along those lines, if I remember correctly. But so let's talk a little bit about people. How do they adapt? How does business adapt to the changing face of work? Yeah, which obviously we've seen a lot of in the last 12, 18 months, especially.
Absolutely. So that image was like, what tools do you equip your team with, and how do they prepare for this new environment? But we've seen absolutely over this last 18 months with COVID that already there's been a rapid transformation and at a speed that we would never have projected. I picked out, when I was putting stuff together, I found a couple of old images. There's a book called The Death of Distance, and its other tagline is The Fate of Location. And location and distance are starting to become irrelevant in many, many respects. And we've seen that with people working at home, and we're all, well, certainly I am, Kieran is, and I'm sure the majority of people today are probably tuning into this from a home office or a remote location. And this picture of the tumbleweed in the office was kind of iconic, and saying, where have all the people gone? And you look on that chart on the left, and kind of it says, well, where do people work? And the thing I wanted to highlight on this slide is this was from 2012. So this is 9 years ago. And already the traditional work environment was seen as transforming, and we've literally just had that catapult during the last year, and it moves on. It becomes even further, and as employers, and as leveraging, depending upon the nature of your business, but leveraging your human resource and your talent to work and coordinate. So there's a pie. If you imagine a picture of a pie, and each of us are one slice of that pie, that's my work, but together we work, and we collaborate, and we produce. How do you start doing that in an environment? And this, I've lifted this from Harvard Business Review, and you've got this. It's not just the location, but it's also the timing. And the bottom left, kind of the traditional, it's kind of constrained, it's fixed, and moving into the top right, it becomes unconstrained. So people can work anywhere, and they can also work anytime. And how do you manage that? We'll talk about culture and leadership in a short while. But how do you how do you coordinate? How do you get the team? How do you collaborate? Sharing information, and thinking of the way we used to work, where we worked together and you evolved on certain stuff, to now working together but independently or separately, and managing those things. Also, and this is not specific to 4IR, it's been happening, and if you're familiar with Graham Codrington's work and many other writers about Mind the Gap, they talk about all the generations. So we know of all the different generations, but we now have multiple generations working side by side, or virtually, virtually side by side, email by email, but they all have different styles about the way in which they do things. I not only like the kind of preferred method of communication, but I love the little icons, particularly Generation Z, who's got the backpack and the mandatory coffee mug coming out of Starbucks or where they come from. But these are the different lifestyles and how you get these people to work together, and also how you create a career, and how you recruit, you develop, you retain your talent. These are some of the things that are happening. They're both affected by the technological and the fourth IR, but they're also affecting 4IR in the way in which things happen. So without making these observations, it's like, okay, well, what does this mean? And these next two slides really for me are probably the most important when I think about the human resource and the people. And Alvin Toffler, a very famous futurist and management guru, talking about illiteracy and using that concept about the 21st century and saying illiteracy in the 21st century is not going to be about reading or writing, but it's going to be about the ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn. Because things are moving at such pace. And if you've looked at any of these kind of, there's a series of videos called Shift Happens, and other futurists, one of the lovely buzz lines is that many of the jobs in 5 years' time or 8 years' time haven't been invented yet.
Yeah.
Or the jobs that you are doing now, what you learned in university is a little bit irrelevant. So this slide was probably the most valuable one for me, coming from the World Economic Forum. It's 2015, already 6 years ago, and just splitting it down and foundational literacies, which is probably what we are more familiar with, and what we're more attuned to measuring, recruiting, identifying, and then leveraging in our organization. But then you're moving into some of the softer stuff of those competencies and then character qualities, and these are going to become more important. We'll talk about culture, but when you've got people who are working remotely, so you don't have not only as much peer-to-peer kind of friction and interaction and guidance and kind of keeping on the straight and narrow, but you're also not having supervisory or managerial input in the traditional way, you've really got to have a strong sense of purpose and understanding about what an individual is doing, why they're doing it, because the rule book will take you so far. And really the differentiation will be, well, what do you do when there's no rule or there's no procedure? If you don't have that innate understanding, and I may be stealing from some of the points I wanted to make on culture, but if you don't have that understanding, then the organization kind of stops and loses a bit of momentum. I don't know if you want to comment. You look like you're about to make a comment there, but we you're going to find a greater degree of empowerment or a need to empowerment. I think I said to you yesterday, the law of eights. So it's like educate, communicate. I wrote it down. Educate, communicate, delegate your team, and in terms of to allow them to innovate and celebrate and calibrate what you're doing. So you can, I'm being a little bit cute, sort of saying the law of eight, but those things need to be in place because people will be more independent, more empowered, and that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing, but it's sometimes it's a scary thing, and it's a dangerous thing. But organizations are going to have to think about these things about how do they leverage, because if someone's remote and doesn't have that, you're not right next to someone else to solve a problem or to answer a question, then production stops or decision stops or something else slows down your organization, and that's disadvantageous. But by the same token, this thing's a little bit of mercury. It's in the ether. It's scary for many people about how do you inculcate that across the organization in a sensible and productive and constructive fashion. And this word cloud that I put together was just, these are, I think, some of the attributes that you're looking for. It goes back to that World Economic Forum slide as well, that you're looking for in people. It's beyond functional literacy. And also there's a journey. They're going to have to keep on learning new techniques, new insights, and then applying those insights in terms of their own work environment.
I think the thing, ultimately around this is that any business is always going to need people in it. But one of the most significant changes is that those people are no longer found in the same places where they were 10 years ago, for example, or even in some cases 18 months ago, and that's not going to change.
And are they found? Are they found or are they built? Or, I mean, and without trying to be crude and talking about people as a machine and building them, but are they shaped?
Yeah.
Without trying to make this too theoretical, I think kind of take what we're talking about and look at the people in your organization and imagine them being empowered and making greater decisions and greater impact in their roles in the business, and not only how that can add value, but how it can propel your organization. And I think that's the kind of mindset or mind shift, if we talk about a revolution, that I wanted to convey, that I see and that I feel that we're definitely going to go through.
Okay. So people are going to be a constant regardless of what industrial revolution we're in. I think the other aspect that is going to be, or is always omnipresent, is the customer. And so maybe let's talk a little bit about what does it mean for the customer experience. And I think, as per your image there, is how do we bring our customers along on the journey? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's obviously vital on this on how we're going to leverage that and what sort of changes this is going to have in respect of customers, the customer journey, and the role of customers. It has evolved. I came across a few images which are some, in a picture tells 1,000 words, and sometimes these things tell 10,000. So I want to give due credit to it. There's a brand called Gaping Void. You can find it on the internet and Google, and they've got wonderful images which just really convey deep messages and learning easily. So I've used them throughout this presentation, and I want to acknowledge that. But just looking, I mean, whether you put the years 1965 or even 1990 and to today, the way in which you're doing advertising has evolved. Not only the medium, but the concept and what you're trying to do. As opposed to product, need, functionality being the key things, there's now we want to understand the why, the purpose, how you do things, and why you're, who you are, almost this personality and set of values of an organization. But you also, we've all heard of marketing going from this broad shot approach to now one-to-one. And there's a wonderful, and I think this is, the wonderful saying that says, everyone knows, every marketing director knows that 50% of their marketing spend is a waste. They just don't know which 50. And I think that's going to be changing, because you can now be far more scientific about what you're trying to do and who you're talking to, and how you, if you want to. An influencer now starts to have negative connotations or cynical connotations. If you want to influence your customer, there's a whole influencer marketing dimension. But if you want to nudge them along, if you want to help bring them along that journey, and this image also just, these customers might all be buying a similar product or a similar service or a similar experience, but they're all coming at it from a different point of view, with a different intention and a different way of retaining that. So gathering data about individuals. We got bombarded last week about the POPI Act coming into play, and 2 years ago we got bombarded about GDPR, which is the Global Data Protection Regulations, coming into play in Europe. So yes, we need to be respectful about data, but if data is used in the right way, it can be beneficial. And without sounding like a spokesperson for Silicon Valley or Facebook or anyone else, I think all of us, if our ambition is to understand our customer to help deliver greater experience and greater value, then as long as your motives are pure, then hopefully your actions will stick with that. But understanding your customer and collecting data is now, it's par for the course. If you're not doing it, you're going to become like a Kodak or a BlackBerry, or you're going to get left behind. Just as a classic example, in fact, I saw an email came through to me this morning from I showed Kieran my phone yesterday. I've got 50,000 unread emails. I subscribe to all these reports and updates and tech things all over the place, and I don't necessarily open them all, but some I do. And this one came through this morning, and I just thought it was in an email entitled 15 examples of the way in which data marketing has been used effectively. And this was a campaign that Spotify did, and you can read it, and it's just a way of just communicating and touching with your users, your audience, and reinforcing your brand. And it's really detailed. 3,714 people downloaded it on that day. And it connects, and I thought it was very cute. I mean, I like the song as well, but I thought it was a great example. But coming to the customer journey, so the relationship with the customer. So also with 4IR, things will change, but they also stay the same. So principles of business are not, you're not throwing the principles of business out the window, and what you're trying to achieve, etc. But you're certainly having to amp it up. And make sure you professionalize it and use the skills available. Difference between driving a car and running a Formula One team. And there's a couple of slides I have here on the customer journey. They talk about the same thing, illustrate the point quite differently. But you're going from left to right. Awareness of your product, and this is from a customer's perspective. So are they aware that you have a solution or an offering, a service that they may want or are looking for? Are you able to be found and connected? Is there enough information for the user to make, or the customer to make an informed choice? And then converting that obviously into a sale or a transaction or a relationship, whatever it happens to be. And then there's a life after that. Very few businesses that I come across, in fact, I'm still struggling to find one. You don't have a customer is not a potential repeat customer. There might be a long interval between buying a car and getting your next car, but very few businesses where the customer's not a repeat customer, as well as the fact that this advocacy is that they're a mouthpiece for you, and good or bad. So how do you these are the different steps, and on this particular chart, you've got the bold items, and then you've got the kind of normal text. Normal text talking about the mechanisms which would have been the old-fashioned, and the bold sort of talking about what's coming along. And I would like to think that most of our audience today are familiar with those concepts, but using them and taking, I use when running the sales teams. All the sales teams, because as Kieran confessed, I'm an accountant. Okay, so I'm a detailed guy, and everything's a process. And the salespeople like to say accountants don't understand the cost of everything and the value of nothing. But talking to them, I say, yes, I understand sales is an art form, but 75% of it can be science. And it's about taking these opportunities and leveraging the science to build a more robust, predictable, successful. Taking that 50% of ad spend or marketing spend, which is a waste, and converting that into, it's 10% that's potentially a waste, but 90% which is effective. And all of these steps along the way. And there was another chart I had. This one looks like the London Tubes map. And there was another one that looked like a treasure map. But each of these ones can be tracked, monitored, can be managed in a scientific fashion, or and let me take the word science out of it, in a predictable, a reliable, a confident kind of fashion. And if you take a platform like HubSpot, for example, and there are others, and I'm not preaching HubSpot. What I've seen of HubSpot I like, but there are others as well. But you can track that journey of what a potential customer or an existing customer, what their interaction with you is. What are they like? Some like certain things more about your organization or about your offerings more than others do. And if you can then refine your communication or engagement with them towards those things, you will end up with a more loyal customer, or you will expedite that journey along the customer journey along that continuum to the point of transaction, to the point of of being an advocate of a repeat transaction and being a fan. I've got a slide in one or two slides talking about turning customers into fans. And on the previous slide, we had being an advocate and contributing to the next person's decision or their repeat decision. And I mean, and this is happening. Again, I saw this from an email a couple of weeks ago. I dropped it in this morning because I was just, as an example, Nike. This is out of their annual report released 2 or 3 weeks ago. That the percentage of sales, Nike is doing direct sales. 38% of their revenue is direct.
Yeah.
And so not only have the record stores disappeared and the bookstores disappeared, but potentially the tacky stores are also facing evolution.
Those. Yeah.
Yeah. But it also talks to Nike and their engagement with the customer. And there are commercial motivations for this because it's a higher margin, they cut it out. But to what degree, and it'll be industry to industry, brand to brand, about how much of that shifts to the consumer or is retained by the business or the industry themselves. But if you can, retail, the cost of retail, when we were doing when I was doing hardware commodities and so printers and printer cartridges, the amount of margin that needed to be added into a cartridge, for example, which is a grudge purchase, simply because it had to be handled 2 or 3 times to get to a retail store, to be put on the peg, to have the merchandising done, and you're paying for that floor space when actually it's just a generic and someone could order it online and you could ship it for free and still save more than what that margin was in the channel. These are changes. I mean, these are pretty basic. So hopefully I'm not patronizing anyone with my simplistic examples, but just some of the evolution. But these new tools in the customer journey and having information and being able to direct your engagement with the customer, satisfy their needs a lot quicker and make them more loyal and the experience a lot more pleasant. They're there, and companies that don't do it are going to lose out. Net promoter score, I don't like it. It's like a scientific thing. And when people start delving into it, you see it on a presentation and you manage it every month. And why did the NPS go up or go down? It becomes a spreadsheet conversation. But the principle is very important. And you want your customers, on this next slide, you want to be a magnet and you want to attract customers and get future customers, but you also want them to be fans. We don't have customers, we have fans. And each fan creates another 10 customers for you. But going back to that NPS, you want them on the right hand side, but the blue and the red are also really important. And the blue, there's probably a personal reason why something didn't quite meet their expectation, but the red, there's a real reason. There's a real problem that they don't like their experience. If you can start talking to them and understand, well, that's how feedback is a gift. You and I talk about that often. If you can get that feedback, you can enhance your product offering. So try and bring it back rather than me trying to give you a marketing 101 lesson here. I hope it's not coming across that way from an accountant, nochal. But if you can use the technology, the ability to track customer engagements, whether they're visiting your Instagram account, your Facebook site, your Twitter feed, your website, also your core business systems and interactions with them. If you can keep that in a structure it, first of all, because a lot of data is unstructured. So if you can structure it and you can start tracking patterns or engagements, you can enhance and enrich that relationship. And that will stand you in good stead. It should hopefully stand the customer in good stead, and stand your business in good stead. And I just put this last point here under this chapter. If you're not working on mobile, you need to be looking. And I think Kieran, we spoke a little while ago when we were planning this webinar about the profile of companies that Sadar works with and possibly are listening today. And you're not tech company. Well, some of you are tech companies, don't get me wrong, but a lot of you are not tech companies and you're traditional businesses. And you might be sitting there thinking, oh, he's just a tech junkie and he's getting excited about the latest buzzword and the new stuff. But these things can be brought to I'm still trying to find a business where someone can convince me that you can't bring any of this kind of innovation, and these are simple things, to the business, and enrich your relationship with all stakeholders, not just customers. But as that says, all roads lead to mobile. Used to say all roads lead to road. And I put this advert there, which is actually, I mean, it's Samsung Galaxy S4. And I was asking Kieran, I don't know which S we're on. I'm an Apple user, but we must be on S10 or 12 or something. So this is a very old ad, but the message there is life companion, and that's what it's become. The mobile is the life companion, and so it's instantaneous. People are lazy, they're greedy, they're selfish, they're impatient. They want all these things. They want it now. And if you can engage with them on that platform, it's you know, I don't believe you can afford to not engage with them on that platform, if I can put it that way. And and we've all become, you know, mobile junkies, and we know how to use the information, and we've got our apps, and we get our information, and it does. It can be a demon. Okay, it can destroy lives if you become addicted to it. But in many processes, it can enrich what's going on in terms of the relationship.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes left because I'd like to leave a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. So people, customers, the other critical component obviously relates to culture, and strongly linked to culture of leadership, because that's ultimately what drives culture in an organization. So I guess two questions: what about culture, and what does it mean for leadership? How does leadership change and culture change in this fourth industrial revolution?
Yeah, and maybe the answer is it's again the core principles of these things is that they don't change from 1, 2, 3 IR and 4 IR, but the context and the tools and the application itself's changed. The wallpaper's changed. So yeah, you've got to get people to follow you, as this image showed. There's no point going out and beating your chest if you've got no one following you. Culture is this mythical point of convergence where purpose, spirit, differentiation, and excellence kind of come together, and they can be absolute. So they can be plus or minus. So you know, someone might not be, a business might not be excellent. They might be negative on some of those scales. But you know, for me, those are the things that bring culture together, and it's really hard to define. Again, I mentioned Gaping Void earlier, and they are a company that do culture transformations or culture journeys. And these are some of the wonderful little icons that they have in their tool bag. And the one that's, you know, that certainly stands out for me is culture has a direct correlation to engagement. We could talk about culture. There's a whole other webinar. In fact, it's a series of webinars. But I did touch on it a little bit earlier when we were talking about the team. Because the speed of business is going to accelerate. So the velocity, the change, the momentum, the inputs to business. So if we talk about data and information coming into the business are going to be far greater. That you, first of all, we spoke about the people. We're going to have to transform a lot of the workforce in terms of them being they're knowledgeable and empowered and have this cultural environment whereby they do feel comfortable to make those decisions, and that there's a framework for it. But as I gave the example, is at some point the rule book doesn't, or the process flow doesn't have what's the next step. You're going to be presented with a set of circumstances which maybe you haven't done before, and it's only at that level that if you have culture, if you have purpose, if you have what you stand for, that you can actually answer and address, you know, either those questions or those situations. So I do think if you're sitting there and saying, you know, is business going to speed up? Are the inputs and information going to increase? Are people going to be far more autonomous? Well, if those things are going to exist, then culture becomes very important to allow and enable people to continue to execute and to keep the momentum of the business going forward. I'm sure people will have different opinions, but I'm giving one view. Again, when I was preparing for this, I came across a website that allows individuals and companies to do a bit of a readiness test. Personally, I thought the test was bit silly. I wasn't sure what they were trying to achieve with it, but I did find one aspect of it as you're about to start it, putting it there. This is a little bit kind of evangelical. So these are people who are totally into digital transformation, etc. But I felt that the sentence that was there and the points that they made were useful, so I thought I'd share them. So customers at the heart of your organization, people as the soul, so using this body and life experience as the metaphor. So customers at the heart, people at the soul, and digital or information or processes being the oxygen of the company. But perhaps more telling for me was that sentence I highlighted. So it's, leadership. You talked about leadership. What does leadership need to do? Define a desirable future purpose, set clear ambitions, and enable an open-minded culture. And they've probably said far more eloquently than I have in one sentence, and I've taken 2 or 3 minutes of the valuable time to make this this same statement. So yeah, and I'm conscious of time, so if I just kind of move ahead. So potentially armed with this, I won't say knowledge, but maybe these questions, it's like you look ahead and you say, well, what's our journey? What do we do? And getting into the leadership, and I'm imagining the delegates or your customers and your clients who are listening to this as executives, some non-executive, some executive. What do I do now? Where do I go? How does this affect me?
How do I bring it all together?
Yeah. So, I mean, this slide, you'll have to, maybe through this presentation, you're getting a sense of my warped sense of humor, but this slide I love. It's just, for me, it epitomizes curiosity. And I think what you need to do is you need to be curious. You need to be questioning, you need to be learning, you need to be inquiring about what's going on out there. And, they say discovery comes to the prepared mind. These, whilst you're out there looking and asking questions, you'll start to find answers and gain insights. Some stuff that but what do? You go back after its presentation, you say, God, that guy's got a terrible accent and that was really boring. Well, now what do I do in my business? There are some tools, and again, there's some science. The answer to this could be an art form. Leadership and culture are an art form, but there's some science in terms of what you can underpin some of these, the journey and the learnings and the reflections along the way. SWOT analysis, I'm sure all of us are familiar with. Strengths and weaknesses, it's internal, it's about us. Opportunities and threats, usually external possibilities in the future, but things that we can see. I'm sure we all do them, whether formally or informally. We've got a feel for them. Pest and pestle analysis is not often, it's not something that is as often or I come across or that people talk about. But essentially, it's also just looking at in your surrounds and your context and breaking it down so as you go around from 7 o'clock around to 4 o'clock. So political, economic, social changes, technological changes, or environmental considerations, and legal considerations. Sometimes it's just pest, and that E is environment rather than economic. But reflecting on those as they affect your industry, you don't have to solve the world's problems. Reflect on your own business, and I'm sure insights will come to you if you're taking a moment to sort of do a little bit of homework and reflection on some of those dimensions. Of course,
sorry to interrupt you for a second. I mean, I suppose it's a little bit of a simplistic kind of perspective, but the questions are far more important than the answers. And from a leadership perspective, having the ability to ask the right questions or be asking ourselves the right questions we should actually be more obsessed with the questions as opposed to trying to answer everything, because we'll run ourselves ragged trying to answer everything. And I kind of take that out of what you're saying here.
Yeah, and I think also if you panic about a question and an answer, you'll narrow down your field of kind of engagement or focus, because you've got a bigger burden to try and solve it. Where I totally agree with you. I think the questions are far more important. And there are people, there are companies, there are other people who can help you find the answers. Bearing in mind, of course, at the risk of sounding like a consultant, I think consultants have their place, but they also need to be You need to appreciate that they have their place. And don't forget, and this is what I would urge everyone who's listening, no one understands your business better than you do. Other people might bring a framework, they might bring a perspective, an insight to share with you, to overlay or to give context to what's happening in your business and to solve a puzzle. But don't worry and think, oh, I've got to outsource this problem, because it won't work. You are the ones who are the captains and the leaders and the ones who have the insight into your business, and so don't diminish that. There's a slide, a couple of slides, and I'm conscious of time, so I kind of flick through them. But if I go to this one, there's a book that was published called New Leadership Literacies. So sticking with that theme of literacy in the 21st century, and this loop, this foresight, insight, action loop at the center, and I had it on the slide there, is a really certainly resonated with me, that you've got to be out there looking and considering and finding sources to give you some sort of foresight, and that aha moment, you'll get an insight as to, oh, okay, I can see how big data or cloud computing or 3D printing can be applied in my business, and then you can get into action and you continue to go through those iterations and spirals. And there's no big bang, and you can't boil the ocean. So take it in baby steps, small steps. And this leadership literacy flow here, it also says, I mean, it's voluntary fear engagement at the top left. It is uncertain. It's not clear. But put yourself into an uncomfortable position and let your organization see that you're comfortable being uncomfortable. Being there when you're not there, well, that's both a takeoff of the virtual world environment, but also empowerment and delegation, and the ship and the business can still run without you. And that bottom left, positive energy, that's all about leadership and culture. I'm conscious of time, Kieran, and I'm sure probably some of the other slides we can. You've seen them. I don't want to necessarily waste the time. I mean, a reflection. Try and imitate the customer journey, and just wonder, how hard is it to be your own customer, and are there ways that you could make it easier? Because it doesn't matter what industry you're in. Ease of doing business is it's just a pleasure, and that's what you want to be. You want to be the go-to supplier, go-to customer. Now, next, future, the three horizons. There is a theory that's going around at the moment that actually the speed of change is going to be so great that actually you can't afford, there's this three horizon framework, both of which have got a lot of traction and credibility, and I'm certainly not dissing them. But there's also a mindset and a philosophy that says, think now, future, and come back to next. So as opposed to worrying about the future after you've done your next, actually look ahead to the future, because it probably will shape it. It will influence what your next step could be, because there's obviously going to be options in terms of the next. Little things that count, customer loyalty. I mean, it's COVID. I'm sure many people have had COVID tests. You go to Lancet Laboratories, they've got an app, and you get notified, and you can see all your results in the past. I bought some stuff online. Every time it goes through a stage in the process, you get a notification from Takealot. It gives you peace of mind. It's the little things. It's not necessarily the quality of the product, but the thing that, as the Gucci, they talk about, the price tag will be long forgotten when the quality is remembered, but still the quality of the product. But it's the experience and coming back to your, wanting to be the customer of choice, or the supplier of choice for your customer, making them fans. These little things, peace of mind, will make a difference. I had a few things I just wanted to say to you. If you're worried, if you're intimidated about some of this, like big data, data analytics, artificial intelligence, don't be. These are buzzwords. And with all due respect to the technical people, the propeller heads, the engineers, they love this stuff, and that's great. That's what they should do, but don't be intimidated by it. And I just thought of, the Pareto principle, which I never knew was called the Pareto principle. I always knew it as 80-20. We've all been doing our analysis and these kind of using these trick methods. Pivot tables, well, talk about learning and unlearning. If you don't know how to do a pivot table, then you're going to quickly become redundant. And I've got to put my hand into that basket. I used to think I was an Excel guru, but we're doing that, and we're manipulating tons of data, and your team are definitely doing that and making decisions in the business. So don't let anyone intimidate you about the fact that there's this overwhelming tsunami of information and super complex, and only a select few in the world are going to be able to understand it and take you on that journey. Barcodes, if you see barcodes in your business, I promise you that's a point. Whenever that object moves with a barcode, there's something happening there, and there's potentially useful data attached to it. We typically only capture data at a transaction, certainly a financial transaction or a production transaction. But things like quality, things like time to produce, things like temperature, etc. Some of these things, you can capture now, and it can make a difference, give you insights than previously. And the technology will move from barcodes into small IoT tags or Bluetooth tags, which are affordable, and they can talk. You don't have to scan it. They can talk to sensors in your warehouse, or going out the gate of your property, or in your shop, or in whatever's happening in. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, your fridge. Yeah. I think I'll finish there. I think again, I'm a fan of gaping void, if you can see. But kind of data on the left becomes information, becomes knowledge, becomes insight, becomes wisdom. And there's a few other journeys there about experience, creativity, big data there on the third on the left. And then at the bottom, the principal data, often siloed in many organizations. Get it structured, it becomes information. But the aim of all learning is not knowledge, it's action. And so how do you apply that and use it in your business? So yeah, I'll shut up now. Maybe that's a good thing.
Fantastic. Folks, if there are any questions, please put them through to us. Mark, there's a question that came through quite early on already from Eric, and as the 4IR takes off, digitization versus study books, assume people have access to quality Wi-Fi and data, access which is not readily available. How do we overcome this restriction?
It's a problem. It's a lag, certainly for Africa. But the one thing I'm exceptionally confident about is that Africa will leapfrog. Africa leapfrogged the US in terms of cell phone technology. We went straight to GSM. Was it GSM or GPRS? I can't remember. But anyway, we leapfrogged an old technology, and America had a legacy technology. But Africa did that. I think I mentioned briefly satellite internet, and Starlink, I think, is the business venture of Elon Musk. And they're going to have 1,300 satellites at the end of this year and provide commercial service. And I can't remember what the percentage coverage he's talking about. But one of the flags of the 4IR is internet everywhere, and being permanently connected regardless. And this will come. Clearly, there's a lag, there's a legacy. I don't think Africa will be left behind, but yes, there's going to be a time frame before we can convert that. It's an observation. That doesn't answer your question, but it's an observation.
Right. We have a question from Peter. Peter, please go ahead. Just unmute for us. Peter, we can't hear you. I think you're muted. Let me see if I can unmute Peter. Okay. No, I don't.
Did we know what the question was?
No, he just had his hand up, so I assume he wanted to ask a question.
Okay.
Anyway.
The glories of this technology. We are moving ahead, and we're having virtual engagement, but we still have some teething problems.
Yeah, indeed.
We all do, and I'm not. I've been there, Peter.
Right. Well, Mark, it is 1 o'clock, so
thanks everyone for their time.
Really like to thank you for your insights and your time this afternoon, and for being on the webinar this afternoon. I think the feedback is certainly lots of great insights, and stay awake, because it's all going to change tomorrow. I think that's the bottom line, and it's so thank you very much. Really appreciate your insights this afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks very much for the opportunity, and I wish you all a great journey and great success. It's been a privilege to spend the time with you.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Have a fantastic afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I see there are a few questions about sharing the slides. We will make the slides available. Jenny does have all of your details when you're registered, so we'll make sure that those slides are available to share. Mark, I did see somebody asked a question about the survey that you were talking about.
Okay, I'll send you the link.
You could share the link as well. That would be great.
Yeah, and if anyone, if on some of the slides or some of the points that I've raised, you can clearly go back to Siddhar, whether Jenny or Kieran, ask a question, and I'm happy to share with you where my sources. Hopefully, I can remember them because I flicked through many Google sites, and other things. I did try to keep a track of all that. Yep.
Great. Thanks very much. Have a lovely afternoon.
Cheers. Thank you. Cheers. Ciao.
Bye.